Hello students, welcome to Educate. Today we will be studying the third chapter of your class 12th NCERT history. In themes in Indian history, we will be studying chapter Kinship, Caste and Class. So up until now we have learned कि उस टाइम पे जो societies थी, as we have talked about the collapse of the Indus Valley civilization and afterwards जो different kingdoms आए थे, the rise of chiefs, chiefdoms, new script, Brahmi, Pali, Prakrit, Sanskrit being one of them. We have also learned about different categories of the society or different castes of the society taking shape, and different classes of artisans, craftsmen, and different categories of such skilled workers. Also, हमने different kingdoms का rise देखा था, the Gupta Empire, the Kushanas, and many more in the south, the southern Pandyas, Cholas, etc. Okay, so here we'll be looking at mainly the society, how it was governed from the period of 6th century BC to 600 Common Era, as mentioned here. Sorry, 600 BC. Okay, 600 BC to 600 CE. इसके बीच में जो टाइम है उसके बारे में चैप्टर बात करता है. Historians often use textual traditions to understand these processes. As mentioned before, historians के पास सिर्फ और सिर्फ एक मात्र तरीका होता है किसी भी पुराने टेक्स्ट को जानने का, वो होता है थ्रू what was written on stone or inscribed on it. Okay, some texts lay down norms of social behavior like the Manusmriti. Okay, others describe and occasionally comment on a wide range of social situations and practices. We can also catch a glimpse of some social actors from inscriptions. Okay, as we will see, each text and inscription was written from the perspective of a specific social category. All right, किसी ना किसी सोशल कैटेगरी के नजरिए से या उनके लेंस को देख करके उनके बेसिकली व्हाट दे ट्राइंग टू से फ्रॉम देयर पर्सपेक्टिव ऐसे समझा जाता है. ऑलराइट, सो वी नीड टू कीप इन माइंड हु कंपोज्ड व्हाट एंड फॉर whom. वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट, हु कंपोज्ड व्हाट एंड फॉर whom. किसने कंपोज किया, जो चीज लिखी गई है किसके लिए लिखी गई है. पुराने जमाने में बहुत ज्यादा ये जानना जरूरी था, बिकॉज फॉर एग्जाम्पल इफ वी लुक एट रामायण, somewhere around 10,000 BC it is said that Ramayana eventually happened and it was written down by sage Valmiki. Okay, but through time onwards इसके बहुत वर्जन्स हैं. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, अगर कई लोगों को ये बात नहीं पता होगी, इंडिया में बहुत वर्जन्स हैं रामायण के, सिर्फ एक नहीं है जो सिर्फ हमें पता है, where Ram is the hero, Ravan is the villain. It's not the way. In different versions there are different theories and entirely different theories through and through from what we can see. So who composed and for whom was it written? For example, जब हम रामायण की बात करते हैं, two versions of it, वाल्मीकि and तुलसीदास. ओके, सो जो दो वर्जन्स हैं अपने आप में जब हम इनको पढ़ते हैं तो हमें माइन्यूट डिफरेंसेस देखने को मिलते हैं. वेयर एज तुलसीदास इन रामचरितमानस, दिस वाज रामायण. रामचरितमानस जो मिडीवल टाइम में लिखी थी ड्यूरिंग द रेन ऑफ अकबर, रामचरितमानस। ओके, सो यहां पे हम देखते हैं कि थोड़े डिफरेंसेस हैं। हालांकि इन रामचरितमानस तुलसीदास हिमसेल्फ claims that he draws inspiration from the tales as it is described from the Ramayana written by Valmiki. All right. So we also need to consider the language used and the ways in which the text was circulated. Okay. Very important again. कौन सी लैंग्वेज यूज होती थी? स्क्रिप्ट क्या थी? राइट टू लेफ्ट, लेफ्ट टू राइट। ऑलराइट, किस तरीके से क्या कहते हैं उन स्क्रिप्चर्स को लिखा जाता था? दैट इज समथिंग वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट। यूज केयरफुली, टेक्स्ट्स अलाउ अस टू पीस टुगेदर attitudes and practices that shaped social histories. In focusing on the Mahabharata, for example, a colossal epic running in its present form into over 100,000 verses, 1 lakh verses, all right, with depictions of a wide range of social categories and situations. We draw on one of the richest texts of the subcontinent. बहुत ही rich, vibrant, historical text, Mahabharata, with a lot of characters, a lot more characters and a lot more complicated than this tale over here, Ramayana. So deciphering and studying it requires a lot of patience, as mentioned here. Okay, we draw on one of the most richest texts of the subcontinent. That's why it has been termed as one of the most richest texts of the subcontinent. All right. It was composed over a period of about 1000 years ago. That is 500 BC onwards, somewhere around that time. And some of the stories it contained may have been in circulation even earlier. All right. इसमें कुछ कहानियां महाभारत में जो मेंशन करी गई throughout within the Mahabharata itself. We can notice that basically उसके अंदर और उसके अलावा भी बहुत सारे टेल्स हैं. So that is one thing. Another, ऐसे कुछ टेल्स पहले से ही प्रचलित होंगी, पहले से फेमस होंगी, जो बाद में महाभारत में इंक्लूड करी गई. Okay? The central story is about two sets of warring cousins. The text also contains sections laying down norms of behavior for various social groups. Basically, दो परिवारों के बीच में, दो cousins और दो भाइयों के बीच में लड़ाई के बारे में है महाभारत. It's about war, but most importantly, it is like a religious text because it prescribes the norm and duties of righteousness, etc. for each and every one of us. That's where the turn begins. Okay? So, occasionally, though not always, the principal characters seem to follow the norms. Alright? What does conformity with norms and deviations from them signify? Okay. Deviations and conformity of a norm. A norm is something that has been going on for a longer period of time. Conformity is basically उसको मानना, and deviation उसकी राह से भटक जाना, कि क्या चीजें सोसाइटी में नॉर्मल हैं, क्या चीजें होनी चाहिए, क्या नहीं होनी चाहिए, इस बारे में डिस्कशन है. ऑलराइट. As mentioned before, timelines must be clear. So the timeline of the Mahabharata is somewhere around 500 BC onwards. The critical edition of the Mahabharata. Okay, this is the critical edition of the Mahabharata. उसका एक excerpt है. This section printed in large bold letters is a part of the main text. The smaller print lists variations in different manuscripts which were carefully catalogued. All right, over here. ठीक है? An example. So, the critical edition of Mahabharata. One of the most ambitious projects of scholarship began in 1919 under the leadership of a noted Indian Sanskritist, V.S. Sukhtankar. Sanskritist. As the name suggests, a person or a scholar whose main subject or area of study is the Sanskrit language and its texts. All right. So, a team comprising dozens of scholars initiated the task of preparing a critical edition of the Mahabharata. All right. Critical edition, what does it mean? What exactly this involve? Okay, so initially it meant collecting Sanskrit manuscripts of the text written in a variety of scripts from different parts of the country. Now, यहां पे हम ये समझ में आता है हमें, इससे पहले जो मैंने आपको अभी एक्सप्लेन किया था, एग्जैक्टली वही केस महाभारत के साथ भी है. Different editions, different versions throughout time. So usually what historians do is they trace the most ancient one for the origin. What is the origin behind it? To see that, they trace the most ancient form. ये सबसे पहले चलो मान लेते हैं XYZ या n नंबर ऑफ वर्जन्स हैं महाभारत के, तो उसको समझने के लिए पहले जो सबसे एंशिएंट वाला, जो सबसे पहले लिखा गया था, उसको उठा के हिस्टोरियंस देखेंगे कि एक्चुअली उसपे क्या था. ऑलराइट. एंड एज डिफरेंट वर्जन्स कैरीड ऑन, तब हिस्टोरियंस एंड स्कॉलर्स शेप करते हैं अपने आइडिया को ये समझने के लिए कि एक्चुअली सोसाइटी कंडक्ट कैसे होती होगी. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, कोई एक ऐसी चीज है जो एंशिएंट वाली, वेद व्यास, हु इज द ऑथर ऑफ महाभारत, महर्षि वेद व्यास, सेज वेद व्यास. ओके, ऑल राइट. सो व्हेन हिस्टोरियंस आर लुकिंग एट महाभारत फॉर एग्जाम्पल, तो कुछ चीजें बेशक कॉमन हो या फिर कुछ चीजें डिफरेंट हो ओरिजिनल महाभारत में जो सेज वेदव्यास ने लिखी थी, एंड लेटर ऑन जो इंटरप्रिटेशंस एंड डिफरेंट वर्जन्स और एडिशंस केम ऑन थ्रू टाइम. व्हाट हिस्टोरियंस विल लुक एट, फर्स्ट थिंग, जो ओरिजिनल टेक्स्ट है उसकी ऑथेंटिसिटी, हाउ द कैरेक्टर्स वर शेप्ड एंड व्हाट इज द ओरिजिन ऑफ दीज कैरेक्टर्स, वेयर दे कम फ्रॉम, एंड इट्स ऑल दीज थिंग्स. लेटर ऑन व्हेन दे लुक एट डिफरेंट वर्जन्स थ्रू टाइम, वो अपना नोशन और अपना परसेप्शन शेप करते हैं इस बात पे कि व्हाट वाज द सोसाइटी लाइक. अगर एक आध चीज कॉमन मिल रही है, फॉर एग्जांपल अर्जुन के कैरेक्टर में, या फिर फॉर द केस ऑफ द्रौपदी और भीम और युधिष्ठिर, सो इफ दे लुक एट अ कॉमन चेन नॉट बीइंग ब्रोकन, ऑलराइट, अगर वो चेन नहीं टूट रही है थ्रू द ओरिजिनल वन एंड द अदर एडिशंस, then that perception is considered to be a gospel truth for historians, because through time this was the only remaining trace available of ancient societies, and if there is something common being traced, then it becomes kind of like a very solidified proof for historians what the respective characters would have been like. Okay, so the team worked out on a method of on comparing verses from each manuscript. All right. Ultimately, they selected the verses that appeared common to most versions and published these in several volumes, running into over 13,000 pages. Different volumes, different publications, 13,000 pages. All right. The project took 47 years to complete. 47 साल लग गए थे इसको कंप्लीट करने में. इट्स अ बिग प्रोजेक्ट कंपेयरिंग मैन्यूस्क्रिप्ट्स, एंशिएंट टेक्स्ट्स, एंशिएंट स्क्रिप्ट्स, देयर इंटरप्रिटेशंस अदरवाइज इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. संस्कृत में काफी सारे ऐसे टर्म्स होते हैं जिनको डिसाइफर करना या फिर जिनको लिटरली ट्रांसलेट करना इंग्लिश में बिकम्स अ बिग टास्क. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, when we talk about religion, God is just God in the Western sense. But when it comes to the Indian philosophy, there are different levels of a God. Devta, then we have Brahm, then we have Trimurti, Rudra, Vishnu, Sadashiv, then we have Parabrahma. लॉन्ग स्टोरी शॉर्ट, जो पर ब्रह्म एक टर्म है उसकी ट्रांसलेशन इंग्लिश में कुछ भी नहीं है. यू पॉसिबली कैन नॉट ट्रांसलेट द टर्म पर ब्रह्म टू इंग्लिश. पर ब्रह्म इज ऑल्सो गॉड. देवता कैन बी कंसिडर्ड डेटी. भगवान इज ऑल्सो गॉड. भगवान और पर ब्रह्म में भी फर्क है. सो दैट इज द प्रॉब्लम दैट हिस्टोरियंस और ट्रांसलेटर्स यूजुअली कम अक्रॉस, एंड इट टुक देम 47 years to complete. All right? So two things became apparent. दो चीजें इससे पक्की हो चुकी थी, निश्चित हो चुकी थी. Okay? So two things became apparent. There were several common elements in the Sanskrit versions of the story. Okay? Evident in manuscripts found all over the subcontinent, from Kashmir and Nepal in the north to Kerala and Tamil Nadu in the south. Also evident were enormous regional variations in the ways in which the text had been transmitted over the centuries. These variations were documented in footnotes and appendices to the main text. Taken together, more than half of the 13,000 pages are devoted to these variations. Now, दो चीजें देखने में हमें कॉमन मिलती हैं जब डिफरेंट वर्जन्स को, महाभारत जैसे एपिक को एनालाइज करा जाता है, डाइसेक्ट करा जाता है. वी सी दैट द मोस्ट इनहेरेंट और कोर एलिमेंट ऑफ दिस एंशिएंट टेक्स्ट remains same. All right? From north to south, east to west, from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, to Rajasthan to Bengal, it remains the same. All right? So another thing is that जो regional variations है, थोड़ा बहुत regional variation in texts में देखने को मिलता है, जो कि over a very long period of time, generation to generation, ट्रांसफर करा गया है to the currently surviving ones. All right? So in a sense, these variations are reflective of the complex processes that shaped early and later social histories through dialogues between dominant traditions and resilient local ideas and practices. Okay? These dialogues are characterized by moments of conflict as well as consensus. इस टाइम पे जो लोकल आइडियाज थे, कंसेंसस, जो आपस में मिल करके दे यूज्ड टू कम टू वन पर्टिकुलर रेजोल्यूशन, वो एक चीज थी. लोकल आइडियाज और लोकल सेंटिमेंट्स भी थे. Our understanding of these processes is derived primarily from texts written in Sanskrit by and for Brahmins. Sanskrit language, as we have also studied in the chapters previously of class 12 history, Sanskrit was a very elite language. हर किसी के लिए accessible नहीं थी. हर कोई इसको पढ़ना या समझना नहीं जानता था. Only it was a language of Brahmins and gods. All right? हर किसी के लेवल पे नहीं थी ये. When issues of social history were explored for the first time by historians in the 19th and 20th centuries, they tended to take these texts as at face value, believing that everything was laid down in these texts was actually practiced. एक पर्सपेक्टिव 20th सेंचुरी हिस्टोरियंस ने जो इसको समझने की कोशिश करी, दे हैव अंडरस्टूड, और या फिर दे टेंड टू बिलीव that basically जो भी practices in ancient texts में जो centuries old थी जो बताई गई थी वो follow होती थी through and through. All right. So these studies subsequently scholars began studying other traditions from works in Pali, Prakrit and Tamil. जो different traditions थे apart from Sanskrit, scientists and historians started to look and analyze at these particular cultures and languages which were Pali, Prakrit and Tamil, different from the Sanskrit way. All right. These studies indicate that the ideas contained in normative Sanskrit texts were on the whole recognized as authoritative. They were also questioned and occasionally even rejected. It is important to keep this in mind as we examine how historians reconstruct social histories. Okay. So, historians, scientists ने बाकी cultures which were different from the Sanskrit way उनको भी analyze किया and they came to a conclusion that initially जो Sanskrit principles थे they were very authoritative. ऑर्डर देने वाले की राइट रॉन्ग ब्लैक वाइट ऑर्डर करते थे सीधा. तो इस वजह से काफी लोकल कल्चर्स में इट वाज आल्सो रिजेक्टेड और नॉट एम्ब्रेस्ड पर से. सो दैट इज आल्सो समथिंग टू कीप इन माइंड एज हिस्टोरियंस एनालाइज व्हाट हिस्ट्री वाज लाइक एट दैट टाइम. ओके. किनशिप एंड मैरिज. Many rules and varied practices. Marriage. So usually when we talk about ancient Indian marriages, especially before the Marriage Act, modern India के बारे में अगर हम बात करें, उससे पहले की जब बात होती है, तो there is a stigma attached to the customs, traditions of Indian marriages. Usually the dogma sticks to sati practice and dowry, etc. So here we will look at what actually marriage was like at that point of time. So kinship and marriage, many rules and varied practices. Finding out about families. Okay, we often take family life for granted. However, you may have noticed that not all families are identical. They vary in terms of numbers of members, their relationship with one another, as well as the kinds of activities they share. Often people belonging to the same family share food and other resources and live, work and perform rituals together. Families are usually parts of larger networks of people defined as relatives, or to use a modern technical term, kinfolk. किनफोक यानी हिंदी में जैसे कहा जाता है पूरा आपका कुटुंब. Alright? While familial ties are often regarded as natural and based on blood, they are defined in many different ways. For instance, some societies regard cousins as being blood relations, whereas others do not. For example, जब हम family की बात करते हैं, in understanding what societies are like, there are certain families जहाँ पे cousins को direct family के साथ जोड़ा जाता है, लेकिन कुछ cultures हैं जो family में cousins को as it is include नहीं करते. They do not consider cousins to be a part of blood relations. That is why in many cultures cousin marriages भी होती हैं. Okay? For early societies, historians can retrieve information about elite families fairly easily. It is, however, far more difficult to reconstruct the familial relationships of ordinary people. राजा, रजवाड़े, रॉयल फैमिलीज, राजघराने, इन सब के लिए तो बहुत ईजी हो जाता है हिस्टोरियंस को समझना, बिकॉज इनकी सारी चीजें बहुत वेल डॉक्यूमेंटेड होती थी. देयर डेली लाइफ, what they did and everything, what they liked or disliked, everything is written. The main challenge comes to where the question is about the ordinary people at that point in time. Okay? So historians also investigate and analyze attitude towards family and kinship. These are important because they provide an insight to people's thinking. It is likely that some of these ideas would have shaped their actions, just as actions may have led to changes in attitude. All right, terms for family and kin. Important fact: Sanskrit texts use the term kul to designate families and nati, gyati or nati, for a larger network of kinfolk. The term vansh is used for lineage. All right, vansh, nati and kul. All right, या जाति. ठीक है, very important. So another important term to look at, which we will look at here, the ideal of patrilineal. What does patrilineal mean? Patrilineal means tracing descent from father to son, grandson to grandfather to grandson, and so on and so forth. Matrilineal is tracing the descent from mother and the maternal side. Okay, two different paths. The idea of patrilineal. पेट्रिलिनी की अगर हम बात करें तो महाभारत में पेट्रिलिनी, गोत्र, वंश सिस्टम वाज देयर. बट अगर आप लोगों ने महाभारत देखी होगी या फिर उस टाइम का रामायण देखा होगा तो आपने सुना होगा दैट फॉर एग्जाम्पल द माइटी किंग ऑफ लंका, लंकापति रावण, इज मेंशन्ड एज कैकसी पुत्र रावण. ऑलराइट, अंजनी पुत्र हनुमान, कुंती पुत्र भीम, कुंती पुत्र अर्जुन, so on and so forth. So what was the idea of patrilineal, which actually took a very overtaking position in Indian societies? All right, so can you identify points when kinship relations changed at one level? The Mahabharata is a story about this. It describes feud over land and power between two groups of cousins, the Kauravas and the Pandavas, who belonged to a single ruling family, that of the Kurus, the lineage dominating one of the Janapadas. All right, Janapad, Mahajanpad. If we do remember, Janpad important centers होते थे. Mahajanpad, where all of them came together and was a bigger area. Okay, ultimately the conflict ended in a battle in which the Pandavas emerged victorious. After that, patrilineal succession was proclaimed. While patrilineal had existed prior to the composition of the epic, the central story of the Mahabharata reinforced the idea that it was valuable. So patrilineal पहले से एग्जिस्ट करता था, प्री एग्जिस्टिंग था, बट उसके ऊपर एम्फेसिस डालना और उसको एक नॉर्म बनाना मेनली स्टार्टेड ऑफ आफ्टर महाभारत. Okay, after this text was composed. Under patrilineal, sons could claim the resources, including the throne in the case of kings, of their fathers when the latter died. तो जो बच्चे होते थे, खासकर की सन्स, लड़के, वो अपने फादर की वेल्थ, लैंड और रिसोर्सेस सबको इनहेरिट कर सकते थे राइटफुली. और अगर रॉयल फैमिली से बिलोंग करते थे, दैट वुड ऑल्सो इंक्लूड द रॉयल थ्रोन, यानी कि राजगद्दी. Most ruling dynasties, somewhere around the 6th century BC onwards, claimed to follow this system, although there were variations in practice. Sometimes there were no sons. So यहाँ पे थोड़ा ट्रिकी सिचुएशन आ जाती है. पेट्रिलिनियल सोसाइटी में जब बेटे ही ना हो, then what? Especially during the time when a folklore such as that of Mahabharata has been composed and released for the people. There were no sons. In some situations, brothers succeeded one another. In some situations, brothers succeeded one another. Sometimes, other kinsmen claimed the throne, and in very exceptional circumstances, women such as Prabhavati Gupta exercised power. Prabhavati Gupta, we had studied about her, and the जो एक पिलर है जिसपे इंस्क्रिप्शन मिली है आई थिंक इन ब्राह्मी और पाली was about Prabhavati Gupta, the first reigning female ruler of the Gupta dynasty. All right, exceptions होते थे. Now we'll look at the Kuru Panchal region and neighboring areas during the time of Mahabharata. ठीक है? So looking at the map, we can see here Indraprasth, Kuru, Hastinapur, all right, very important. Present day Delhi, Mathura. These are again one thing that you must notice during this particular point in time. जितने भी important जनपद महाजनपद होते थे वो रिवर बैंक्स पे होते थे. फॉर एग्जाम्पल यू कैन सी हियर सारनाथ, वाराणसी, कौशाम्बी. देन वी हैव द वत्स, क्या कहते हैं, सॉरी, वत्स का जो महाजनपद है वो बौद्ध गया, पाटलिपुत्र, वैशाली, कुशीनगर, लुम्बिनी. दिस वाज अंडर शाक्या डायनेस्टी एंड ऑल्सो द महाजनपद. लुम्बिनी वाज व्हाट? द बर्थ प्लेस ऑफ गौतम बुद्धा. ऑलराइट, इंद्रप्रस्थ एंड हस्तिनापुर, ये वो एरियाज हैं जहां पे मेनली पांडव और कौरव के बीच में जो कॉन्फ्लिक्ट हुआ था, जो महाभारत की एपिक है, इस एरिया के अराउंड. एंड बेसिकली समवेयर अराउंड दिस द बैटल एंड द कॉन्फ्लिक्ट जोन वाज, जो बफर जोन था, वाज हियर. ऑलराइट, उज्जैनी, अवंती, अगेन अ वेरी एंशिएंट एंड इंपॉर्टेंट center point or centrifugal point in the long distance trading through land, where it acted as a, where it emerged as a very important trade center. Okay, producing fine sons. So here is an excerpt of a mantra from the Rig Veda, which was probably inserted in the text 1000 BC, to be chanted by the priest while conducting the marriage ritual. It is used in many Hindu weddings even today. I free her from here, but not from there. I have bound her firmly there, so that through the grace of Indra, she will have fine sons and be fortunate in her husband's love. Indra was one of the principal deities, a god of valor, warfare and rain. Here and there refer to the father's and husband's house respectively. So basically in Rig Veda ये जो मंत्र है ये दे रखा है about signing off the daughter to the husband. जब तक वो husband के पास थी तब तक अलग से रहती थी, मतलब सॉरी, जब तक वो अपने फादर के पास थी, the father is transferring the kind of like ownership or custodian rights to the husband who's getting married to her. All right, this is from the Rig Veda. All right, and जो particular इसमें मंत्र है, that is Shanti Minno Shardoya Ischakra Devaschattamaha Devanatam Pahimana Sachantriyatra Purve Sadhya Santi Devaha. Okay, so जब इंद्राणी सर्वाणी भक्तिरश्वमसु मानस्पति संसार भक्ति मुक्ति च विदंती. बेसिकली दिस इज द पर्टिकुलर श्लोक फ्रॉम ऋग्वेद जो कि डिस्क्राइब करता है अबाउट दिस ओनरशिप ऑफ द फीमेल फ्रॉम हाउस, हर ओन हाउस, टू दैट ऑफ द हस्बैंड्स. ऑलराइट, sorry, which was Shanti Minno Shardoya Yashchakra. All right, so here this was the excerpt from Rig Veda. शंतिमिन्न शरदो यश्चकरा जरसम तनुनाम महा पुत्रास यत्र पितरो भवन्ति मानो मध्यः. All right, another one. These are 2 or 3 mantras which are provided in the Rig Veda, which provide the evidence of this being mentioned in the ancient scripture. All right. So, again, why kinfolk quarreled? राजे महाराजे लड़ते क्यों थे? All right, very important. क्या रीजन होता था? This is an excerpt from the Adi Parvan, literally the first section of the Sanskrit Mahabharata, describing why conflicts arose among the Kauravas and Pandavas. सबको पता है, बेसिक है कि inheritance का मामला था. There was a kingdom which both of the parties like the Kauravas and the Pandavas wanted to inherit from the lineage of Kuru, their respective grandfather. All right, Pandu and whatever. So the Kauravas were the sons of Dhritarashtra and the Pandavas were their cousins. Okay, since Dhritarashtra was blind, his younger brother Pandu ascended the throne of Hastinapur. Okay, however, after the premature death of Pandu, Dhritarashtra became the king as the royal princes was still very young. ठीक है, धृतराष्ट्र राजा बने. And as the princes grew up together, the citizens of Hastinapur began to express their preference for the Pandavas, for they were more capable and virtuous than the Kauravas. This made Duryodhan, the eldest of the Kauravas, jealous. He approached his father and said, "You yourself did not receive the throne, although it fell to you because of your defect. If the Pandava receives the patrimony from Pandu, his son will surely inherit in return, and so will his son and his. We ourselves with our sons shall be excluded from the royal succession and become of slight regard in the eyes of the world, Lord of death." Lord of the earth. All right. So here, यहाँ पे हमें समझ में आता है कि जो इनहेरिटेंस का एक lineage था पांडवों के लिए and for Kauravas also, what was it like? Okay. Dhritarashtra was the rightful king, but due to his blindness or birth defect, he wasn't able to become. And meanwhile, his younger brother Pandu ascended to the throne, and जिसके बाद उसकी अनटाइमली डेथ हुई थी और फिर से धृतराष्ट्र किंग बने थे, और लोगों की प्रेफरेंस पांडवों से ज्यादा थी बिकॉज ऑफ देयर राइचियसनेस, देयर बिहेवियर, देयर वर्चुअसनेस, देयर likeness, or whatever it was. All right. Rules of marriage, very important. While sons were important for the continuity of the patrilineage and patrilineage, same thing. Daughters were viewed rather differently within this framework. Daughters का view थोड़ा different होता था. वो कैसे? They had no claims to the resources of the household. At the same time, marrying them into families outside the kin was considered desirable. अब अगर जो लोग थोड़ा बहुत भी अपने विलेज रूट से, अपने रूरल रूट्स या फिर अपने ग्रामीण जो भी गांव अभी भी जाते हैं, इंडिया में अधिकतर ऐसे गांव होते हैं और ऐसा माना जाता है गांव में कि शादी से पहले 5 गोत्र छोड़ने पड़ते हैं. There are 5 gotras that you need to leave. Your own gotra is basically lineage, आपका खुद का गोत्र, आपकी पैटर्नल ग्रैंडमदर का, आपकी दादी का, आपकी मदर का, आपकी नानी का, एंड आई थिंक आपकी आंट का भी, योर बुआस गोत्र ऑल्सो. सो दैट इज वाई द मैरिज आउटसाइड ऑफ द किन as far as possible was considered desirable. Okay, this system called exogamy, literally marrying outside, meant that the lives of young girls and women belonging to families that claimed high status were often carefully regulated to ensure that they were married at the right time and to the right person. Exogamy, बेसिकली मैरिंग आउटसाइड. एंडोगेमी कजन्स में जो मैरिज होती है उसे कहा जाता है. विद इन अ यूनिट काफी कल्चर्स हैं, काफी रिलीजियस ग्रुप्स हैं, काफी एथनिसिटीज हैं इवन विद इन दिस कंट्री एंड ऑल्सो आउटसाइड दिस कंट्री जो इस प्रथा में विश्वास रखते हैं. दे डू बिलीव इन दिस. ओके, मैरिंग विद इन द फैमिली, कजन्स के अंदर ही मैरिज हो जाती है. ऑल राइट. सो इसमें ये बहुत बड़ा चैलेंज होता था कि लड़की की शादी सही समय पे और सही व्यक्ति के साथ कराई जाए. ऑलराइट, इसका बहुत ध्यान रखना पड़ता था बिकॉज द गर्ल हैड नो एक्सेस और नो राइट टू इनहेरिट एनी ऑफ द रिसोर्सेस ऑफ द फादर, लाइक अनलाइक द सन. ऑलराइट. With the emergence of new towns, social life became much more complex. All right. Much more complex and far made to buy and sell their products and share ideas in the urban milieu. Okay. Urban and rural life के बीच में जो connect था, that connection which was through trade and traveling and commerce, that was also happening. This may have led to questioning of earlier beliefs and practices. Faced with this challenge, the Brahmins responded by laying down codes of social behavior in great detail. These were meant to be followed by Brahmins in particular and the rest of the society in general. Rest of the society in general. From somewhere around 500 BCE, these norms were compiled in Sanskrit texts known as the Dharma Sutras and the Dharma Shastras, जो बेसिकली ये रूल्स ले डाउन करते थे कि क्या चीजें होनी चाहिए सोसाइटी में, क्या नहीं होनी चाहिए, सो दैट दिस मिक्सिंग अप ऑफ कल्चर्स विद अदर पार्ट्स ऑफ द कंट्री, जो अदर सेक्ट्स हैं उनके साथ, इसको लिमिट करने के लिए धर्म सूत्र और धर्म शास्त्र समवेयर अराउंड 500 BC कंपाइल करे गए. द मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंट ऑफ सच वर्क्स इज द मनुस्मृति which was compiled somewhere between 200 BCE to 200 CE. One of the most controversial texts yet available and talked about and also discussed throughout the political discourse of this country. While the Brahmana authors of these texts claimed that their point of view had universal validity and that what they prescribed had to be obeyed by everybody, it is likely that real social relations were much more complicated. As mentioned before, these Sanskrit texts, scriptures, were pretty authoritative in nature. White, black, right, wrong, क्या होना चाहिए, क्या नहीं होना चाहिए, about that. Okay? But real life would have been much more complicated as compared to the one written in texts and scriptures. Besides, given the regional diversity within the subcontinent and the difficulties of communication, the influence of Brahmins by no means was all pervasive. So बहुत ज़्यादा Brahmins ने try तो किया by compiling and coming up with such texts, but even then the regional diversity and different cultures within a single subcontinent, they were not being able to be all pervasive. जितना ज़्यादा persuade करना, convince करना भी possible नहीं हो पा रहा था. What is interesting is that the Dharma Sutras and Dharma Shastras recognized as many as 8 forms of marriage. How many? 8 forms, very important. This is extremely important. Of these, the first 4 were considered as good, while the remaining were condemned. जो 8 norms हैं मैरिज के, उसमें first 4 desirable और बाकी के जो बचे हुए लास्ट के 4 हैं, they were looked down upon or frowned upon. Okay? It is possible that these were practiced by those who did not accept Brahmanical norms. The remaining 4 were not accepted by Brahmanical, they rejected Brahmanical norms, and that is why they were condemned, or vice versa. All right, the Gotra of women. What does Gotra mean? गोत्र का मतलब क्या होता है? गोत्र जाति और आपके वंश में क्या अंतर होता है? All right. So, for example, with the help of a diagram, Gotra, as mentioned in Indian scriptures, is a more of larger picture of your ancestry. For example, there are different Gotras. There is Jamdagni, Bhrigu, Bhargav. These are ये कुछ examples हैं गोत्र के. ये तो आपके गोत्र हो गए, that these particular people belonging to each of these gotras trace their ancestry or their roots to the sages with the same name. All right. For example, the Gotra Bhardwaj trace their ancestry to sage Bhardwaj. फिर हम आ जाते हैं वंश के ऊपर. वंश होती है आपकी ब्लड लाइन. You have वंश. Alright? उसकी सब कैटेगरी है. वंश इज लाइक अ सब कैटेगरी ऑफ दिस लार्जर ब्लड लाइन विच इज कॉल्ड गोत्र. Then we have, after Vansh, Kul. Okay? ये कुल कौन सा है? वंश ये है, कुल ये माना जाएगा. All right? So this is how it actually functioned. Moving on, one Brahmanical practice evident from 1000 BC, somewhere around that onwards, was to classify people, especially Brahmins, in terms of Gotras. Now, the Gotra का जो system है, even if we look at Rigved, the earliest possible text that is available in the subcontinent, 1500 BC में ये तक लिखा हुआ है जो दसराजन बैटल था. A battle between 10 kingdoms. What? 10 kings and kingdoms. 10 राजाओं रजवाड़ों के बीच में युद्ध था. One being supposedly led by sage Vashisht, the Kul Purohit or the family priest, head priest. The other led by Bhrigu. So, one of the kings in the Das Rajni Yudh was Ishkwaku, the great grandfather or the first जिसने सूर्य वंश और द सोलर डायनेस्टी की शुरुआत करी थी, जो राम का कुल था रामायण में, उनकी बात हो रही है. ऑल राइट. सो इन टर्म्स ऑफ गोत्रास, ईच गोत्र was named after a Vedic seer, and all those who belonged to the same Gotra were regarded as his descendants. All right, common ancestry as explained here. Two rules about Gotra were particularly important. Two rules: women were expected to give up their father's Gotra during the time of marriage and adopt one of their husband. And members of the same Gotra could not marry, as exogamy was practiced in this culture. All right, marrying as far from the kinship as possible. One way to find out whether this was commonly followed is to consider the names of men and women, which were sometimes derived from Gotra names. These names are available for powerful ruling lineages such as the Satavahanas, who ruled over parts of Western India and the Deccan. Western India and the Deccan, 2nd century BC to 2nd century Common Era. Several of the inscriptions have been recovered which allow historians to trace family ties including marriages. So, जो marriages थी, exogamy, rights of women, both pre and post marriage, are something also to be considered here. Okay, moving on. So before we move on, 8 forms of marriage as mentioned in the Manusmriti. Okay, here are the first, 4th, 5th and 6th forms of marriage from the Manusmriti. वो क्या है? First, the gift of a daughter after dressing her in costly clothes and honoring her with presents of jewels to a man learned in Veda from his father, from the father himself invites. Okay. 4th, the gift of a daughter by the father after he has addressed the couple with the text, "May both of you perform your duties together," and has shown honor to the bridegroom. 5th, when the bridegroom receives a maiden after having given as much wealth as he can afford to the kinsman and the bride herself, according to his own will. 6th, the voluntary union of a maiden and her lover, which springs from desire. All right. So as we can see, 5th and 6th looked down upon, whereas the first 4 थोड़ा डिजायरेबल माना जाता था मैरिज के लिए, सोसाइटी को कंडक्ट करने के लिए, एटसेट्रा. ओके, सो नेम्स ऑफ सतवाहना किंग्स फ्रॉम इंस्क्रिप्शंस. एज मेंशन्ड, जो गोत्र का केस है उसको समझने के लिए सतवाहना एक ऐसी डायनेस्टी थी जिसने इसमें थोड़ा डिफरेंट तरीके से परसीव और इंटरप्रेट किया है इस प्रिंसिपल को. These are the names of several generations of Satvahana rulers recovered from inscriptions. Note the uniform title Raja. Also, note the following word which ends with the term Put, a Prakrit word meaning son. The term Gautami Put means to son of Gautami. Names like Gautami and Vasithi are feminine forms of Gautam and Vashisht, Vedic seers after whom Gotras were named. All right. So Raja Gautami Put Sri Satakani. तो ये जो नाम है किंग का, श्री सतकनी, गौतमी पूत, सन ऑफ द मदर, राजा वसीथी पूत, राजा गौतमी पूत, समी, सो ऑन. आप देख सकते हैं राजा एक्सक्यूज मी, राजा मदारी पूत, राजा वसथी पूत, राजा हरिति पूत, राजा गौतमी पूत, so on. You can notice what it was like. Here we can also see a diagram of a Satvahana ruler and his wife. This is one of the rare sculptural depictions of a ruler from the wall of a cave donated to Buddhist monks. This sculpture dates back to 2nd century BC. Okay? Metronymics in the Upanishads. Very important. I'm marking it here also. This will give you a clarity as to what the Vedic society was like back then. The Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. So basically, जो Vedic structure होता है उसको पहले आपको explain कर देता हूं. So there are the Vedas. Okay, 4 Rigved, Samved, अथर्ववेद, यजुर्वेद. So they consisted of ब्राह्मणास, इनके अंदर जो श्लोक लिखे होते थे, जो हिम्स थे, वो बहुत कॉम्प्लिकेटेड तरीके से थे. सो वी हैव ब्राह्मणास. ऋग्वेद का है कौशिकी एंड ऐतरेय, सामवेद का तैतरीय शतपथ, अथर्ववेद का शतपथ शंखायन, यजुर्वेद का जैमिनी गोपथ. ऑलराइट. फिर इनके आते हैं उपवेद, विच आर द स्मॉलर एंड समराइज्ड वर्जन्स ऑफ अ वेद. इनके पार्ट्स होते हैं, नॉट समराइज्ड एग्जैक्टली. डिफरेंट कैटेगरीज, और हर वेद का एक अपना खुद का उपवेद है जो कि उसको एक कैटेगराइज करता है. फॉर एग्जाम्पल ऋग्वेद का आयुर्वेद, सामवेद का गंधर्ववेद, अथर्ववेद का शिल्पवेद, यजुर्वेद का धनुर्वेद. ऑलराइट. So this is how we understand the Vedas or the Vedic structure. Okay. Then we come at Aranyaks. Brihadaranyak, Aranyak. These are different types of Aranyak. उन्हें कहा जाता था those scriptures or those parts of the Vedas जो कि sages and seers used to write while living as hermits in a jungle. संन्यास लेकर के जंगल में लिखे जाते थे. बृहदारण्यक उपनिषद. उपनिषद इज अ वेदांत. वेदों के अंत में जो रिचुअल्स को एक नॉर्मल सेंस में सिंप्लीफाई करके अकॉर्डिंग टू अ डेली लाइफ्स एक्सप्लेन करता है, दैट इज उपनिषद, बिकॉज इट्स अ वेदांत. वेदांग इज शिक्षा, कल्प, छंद, निरुक्त, ज्योतिष एंड व्याकरण. राइट. This is Vedant. The Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, one of the earliest Upanishads, contains a list of successive generations of teachers and students, many of whom were designated by metronymics. All right. So as we've seen here, कि जो generations थी उनकी inheritance किस तरीके से होती थी ड्यूरिंग दैट पॉइंट ऑफ टाइम. मूविंग ऑन. A mother's advice before moving to the main part. The Mahabharata describes how when the war between the Kauravas and the Pandavas became almost inevitable, Gandhari made one last appeal to her eldest son, Duryodhan. Gandhari, the wife of Dhritarashtra and the mother of the Kauravas. Okay? By making peace, you honor your father and me, as well as your well-wishers. It is the wise man in control of his senses who guards his kingdom. All right. Greed and anger drag a man away from his profits. By defeating these two enemies, a king conquers the earth. You will happily enjoy the earth, my son, along with the wise and the heroic Pandavas. There is no good in a war, no law, that is dharma, and neither profit, arth, let alone happiness. Nor is there necessarily victory in the end. Don't set your mind on war. Duryodhan did not listen to this advice and fought and lost the war. So यहाँ पे हमें देखने को मिलता है कि कैसे however the society was male dominated, patrilineal society थी. Even then the advice of a mother to his son, who was not technically a king but was the successor to his father's throne rightfully according to the laws of that time, is being explained by his mother that there is no good in war, to finally make peace with the Pandavas और सब कुछ sort out करके अपनी life अच्छे से जीनी स्टार्ट करते हैं, rather than always going to war and fighting for succession. क्योंकि war उस टाइम पे kind of like a norm बन चुका था through numerous battles being fought in the subcontinent. So up until now in this chapter, we have seen the Vedas, the society, marriages, and principles of marriage. In the further part of the same chapter, we will be studying it in more detail, and we will be also solving questions and answers so that you can understand it better. So this was the third chapter of your themes in Indian history, class 12, and with this was the third chapter of your class 12 NCERT history, and the chapter's name was Kinship, Caste and Class. We'll be solving the questions and answers and studying the chapter in even more detail in the coming parts. This was part 1. So thank you, Team Educate.